Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Noelle Tomko, host of the Immeasurably More podcast here at Victory Hill Church. We have a really fun episode for you today. We're going to dive into the world of foster care and adoption. We have two people in the room who I'll introduce here momentarily who have quite a bit of experience in this, but are humble enough to say that they're always learning every single day. And we really just want to see God's heart about adoption. It is spoken about so often and so clearly in the Bible. And we just wanted to bring a living example to share with you. May is not only Mental Health Awareness Month, but also Foster and Adoption Month. And so we wanted to highlight the story of their family, and we hope you enjoy. So without any further introductions necessary, Misty and AJ, thank you guys for being on the podcast. Thank you for being so willing to share what God has done in your life through foster and adoption. And if you guys could just tell the audience a little bit about how you wound up here at Victory Hill, how long you've been married, so they can get an idea on how God has grown your family in such a short amount of time.
Okay. So we ended up coming to Victory Hill about 5 years ago, and we really just felt led to come closer to our own community, which is what brought us back towards Lancaster and into Victory Hill.
Yeah, because you're from this area.
Yes.
Originally. AJ, are you?
Yes.
Yeah. So you both were from this area. Now you've brought your family back to this area. You call this place home, which we're thankful for because both of you lead in separate ways. And I know people have just really responded well to having you in their lives. So we thank you for that. How long have you guys been married? I think we talked about this a little off air. There was some confusion.
September will be 13 years.
Perfect. And I love that it was you who answered
Yes.
that. So all the guys listening are like, you got it right. So 13 years, you have 7 children. And what is the age difference between oldest and youngest?
So our youngest is 9 and our oldest is 20.
Yeah. So big difference and a lot of hardship in parenting through those years. I mean, really any stage. I was talking with someone the other day and saying something about being in the trenches of toddlerhood, but having also have a teenager. And I know you guys can respect this. I was like, it's all trench work. It's all being down in the trenches because the problems don't go away. The hardships don't go away. They just become sometimes more difficult and bigger. The effect is bigger for a teenager than my 3-year-old throwing a fit over a broken toy.
Yes.
So I know you guys are kind of in the middle of having all these different ages under one roof. So when we spoke, you shared with me that fostering had really always been on your heart, that you knew from a very young age that this is something that you wanted to learn more about and possibly be involved in. So tell me about that. I believe it was someone in your neighborhood.
Yes. So, in our neighborhood, there was a house kind of diagonal from us that was fostering, and it just always caught my eye.
Yeah.
And I really felt like I wanted to do that, and I really wanted to do it in a loving way and do it the best that I could. So it was something that God laid on my heart when I was very young.
And I know you had mentioned to me that what you saw in just that one particular instance was very unlike how you were raised in your home. And that's really what led you to say, I believe this can be done better and done well.
Yes.
Than kind of how you visualize that. And then you had never really thought about it at all, but Misty brought it up and you were like completely game. I mean, it seemed like there was never really any pushback to say, wait, I'm not sure I want to do this.
Right. It was never really on my radar, until Misty and I met. She had talked about it a few times and I was, okay, whatever. It is what it is. And then the more we talked about it, having some serious talks. And I remember I was at work one day and she, I read an article in the paper that there was, I don't remember the town, but there was a foster family who was trafficking foster kids. And I literally picked up my phone, called her at that moment and said, hey, let's do this. If we can save one kid, it's worth it.
Yeah.
So that's when I really jumped on board.
And before talking with you guys, I knew a lot about trafficking, in many capacities. Having worked in the schools, it's just something unfortunately, in the world we live in now, you need to know. I did not know what you shared with me about there being trafficking within the system, that some people are using that as a means to traffic young children and teenagers, which I think is really important for the listeners to know, right? Like we can't get involved in anything. We really can't help to fight against it, like something that we don't know, that we can't see. So just people even having the knowledge that this is out there is big, because it moved you guys to say, all right, now's the time. This is what we want to do. So how long after that article and that phone call did you then start the process of fostering, which I know is pretty different depending on county and city and all the, red tape, stuff like that.
Right. So the process started pretty quick, but it is definitely a long, slow process, very in depth, which it should be.
Yeah.
So it took some time, several months for us to go through training and a home study where they come and the first question is, where were you born? Tell me all about yourself.
Right.
They dig into every part of your life.
Yeah.
So, and then we were certified and began fostering.
And so you mentioned to me too, I love the words you used. And when she said this, you were nodding. When you shared with me that the Misty and AJ, before they had their first foster child, had a very different view or even a different driving factor than the Misty and AJ that sit here now, having fostered and successfully adopted 5. So at that time, really was it just acting out that call that was in the Bible to take care of the orphan, to take care of the widow, to, we see Moses being adopted and we see Esther being adopted. We see so many beautiful examples of this. Was that kind of the driving force, or, how did you know for sure that God had led you down this path?
I don't know if it was the driving force. I think that as we went on, once we began fostering and we realized how hard this was and how we couldn't do this without God, without Him, that is when kind of the change took place and the trust was placed in Him and the hope was placed in Him. And we gave Him control instead of trying to control it all ourselves.
Yeah, which is stressful. Yeah. Really stressful.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Because then you're picking up all these burdens that you were never intended to.
Yeah, and I would say at the beginning, like Misty was saying, it was more of we were trying to do our will instead of His will, and we had our plan and what we thought that was going to look like, and no, God had different plans.
Yeah. And you were very honest with me, and I would have been the exact same way. But we really want the youngest child possible, because you do hear, and I'm sure in your training you hear a lot of the traumas that can come with fostering children of older ages, and I hear that from a lot of people that are getting involved in the foster system, where there's that fear. I think it's a very normal fear to have, to say, I don't know that we're equipped to handle a child that maybe has had significant trauma in their life, and so you wanted a young baby, and you got that. You told me about your first call. What was that like, that feeling of, oh, this is really happening?
Yeah, I think it was scary and exciting, and just a whole lot to take in, and having that excitement of bringing a baby home, but also having the realization that reunification is always the goal in foster care. Right. So trying to balance both of those and all the emotions that come with it was really, really a big thing. And it was right before Christmas. So
yeah. And you had 2 young children in your home.
Yes.
Yeah. So you had 2 young children in your home. You get this call that you have this baby, and I'm sure you feel 100 things all at once and almost simultaneously, nothing at all. There's this sense of time standing still. I really, really respected and appreciated what you shared about your heart in that moment, that when you found out that you had this child coming, it was like being told you were going to be a father. And I just thought that was so special, because that's a moment nobody can ever take from you. Whatever would have happened, that moment was very real for you. And I think it's important for people to know just how real fostering and adoption is. I myself was adopted, and I remember people asking me in my life if I ever felt like I wasn't really a part of my family. And I was like, it was such a bizarre question to me, because I'm like, this is my family. This is my family. Or even now I'll say, my parents, and they're like, your bio parents or your adopted parent? I'm like, the people who raised me are my parents. That's my family. It didn't matter that I wasn't born to them. That's my family. And it is just a very concrete feeling that you have. And so you have this baby come in, you're both working. Now all of a sudden you have to figure out, who's going to stay home with the baby? Where's this baby going to go? All these very real logistical things that you now need to determine and figure out in a short period of time. Where did you feel good with it being one? Did you have any idea that it was going to become more and quick?
At the time.
Yeah. So when did that moment kind of first sink in that, oh, this is going to be bigger than what we had intended?
That we're not finished.
Yeah.
well, when they called us about the second son that we adopted and asked if we would consider adopting him with his full biological brother who we'd already brought home, that was definitely a big moment, because certainly we had felt that we were done. We were complete. We had done our job and we were finished with this. But God had a lot more plans.
Yeah. He did. And I loved hearing those different parts of your story, because when you got the call for his biological brother to be adopted, at that same time, and correct me if I'm wrong, they asked if you'd be willing to also take in 2 of their half siblings. Is that the same conversation? That's when the same conversation. I mean, that's a lot.
Yes.
To receive a second call when you felt pretty good about having just said yes to the first, right? And now you get this second call to say, oh, there are 3 more. I imagine that pull was difficult to navigate, to say, of course we would want to open our arms to take in anybody, but also we're operating in reality. And you offered your home up for a weekend.
We did.
To have these 3 children come in, and determined we don't feel that this is necessarily right for our family right now, right? But from the time that you received your first son, and it still felt reunification was going to happen, to now these 3 children being at your home for a weekend, that wasn't a very long time.
No.
It was less than a year?
Yes.
And that time goes by fast when you're a parent. I mean, anybody who's a parent knows that time, what is time? What does it really mean? Sometimes a day feels like 1,000 years, and sometimes a year feels like a second. So you then did feel led, though, to adopt his brother.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you legally and officially adopted the 2 of them on the same day.
Yes.
What a special time. And how many people, did you have your whole families there to witness this?
We had, the judge even made the comment that there are minor league baseball games that don't have that many people attend. We had so many people there. So.
I think there was about 42.
Yeah.
How special those kids must have felt.
A lot of support.
Yes.
We have a great support system.
So tell me about that support system. I mean, you guys now run a group for foster and adoption families, which I think, first of all, is so needed, because it is something you have to really work through when your family dynamic changes, right? So you had a support system that came and kind of surrounded you guys. What would life have looked like had they not been there?
Rougher. I mean, yeah, I don't really know how else to explain it, but it'd be.
Yeah. The reason I asked that question is because when we had a conversation about this, I think a little bit towards the end of our first talk, where, we are called to take care of the orphan and the widow as Christians, right? That doesn't always mean that you're called to adopt or to foster, but that can look like coming alongside to support emotionally and spiritually a family who has been called to do what you did. And so people responded to that, and how much their lives have most likely been richly blessed by supporting you guys through this experience, and how much they must have learned. And I just think it's so neat when you think about your family and your home and inside your 4 walls. But if you were to see it from God's perspective, just how far out that goes, all of these people and how their lives have been affected by these children that you brought into your family that you now get to raise and be a part of forever. So the biggest lesson you're now learning, if you were to look back at that time and try to think back to I'm actively learning and parenting, and I've got these 2 boys, and just the world of foster turn into adoption, which there's a lot of hurdles, right? A lot of speed bumps, a lot of probably breaking down on the side of the road and crying because you're not exactly what to do. What were Misty and then AJ, separately, what did you feel like God was really impressing upon your heart during that season of your lives? How was he ministering to you even during that time?
I think for me, it was him showing me that I needed to put my trust in him and not myself, not in AJ and myself, not in the system, but in the Lord, and keeping my eyes focused on him.
Yeah. What about you, AJ?
I would probably say obedience, because when the Lord says go, you need to go. When the Lord says stay, you need to stay. And I think during that time was the biggest time that, we experienced the blessings of following what the Lord wanted us to do. he said, go.
Right.
Go get some of these babies. And I believe he blessed us immensely for that obedience.
When you guys were telling me about your story, all I could think to myself was stories like yours. And of course, everybody's story is unique, but in situations like this, where you start out taking that first step, not knowing what it's going to look like when you're 10,000 steps down, it's such a real example of God being a light to the path. Like, it's one step. You said yes to one, having no idea what that would turn into later in life, but that's faith. Mm-hmm. That's faith is acting out and having absolutely no idea where it's going to go from there. So in terms of your support, you then had more additions to your family. And did your support system at that time get smaller, or did it get bigger?
I don't think it got smaller. I think it's always remained about the same. And then it grew over the years with the groups that we would join and things like that.
Yeah. Have you ever met another couple that's had an experience that's been very similar to yours?
Not until we started going to the TBRI trainings and
And remind me what the TBRI is, because we talked about that and it's very interesting. What does that stand for?
So it's trust-based relational interventions, and it's really just about connecting with your kids. And even though we know that they're safe, we have to create felt safety for them, and which happens through empowering them and connecting with them.
So is this just for foster and adopt families?
No, it could really be for anybody.
Yeah.
Kinship, kiddos that hadn't experienced a bunch of trauma but don't really feel connected to anybody,
Yeah. That's interesting. I'd never heard of it before, but it's something that stuck with me from our conversation.
Yeah, and I would say real quick, the biggest thing about that is we felt we were on an island. Like, there's no family messed up as much as we were. And then we found this, and we came to find out that it's us that needs to change, not these kiddos. We need to make a change in our parenting style.
Yeah.
We need to connect with these kids. These kids have suffered enough. We need to do what we need to do to get on their level, connect with them.
And this program, for lack of a better, this curriculum even has helped you guys do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really changed the lens through which we take a look at our kids and our situations.
Yeah. What a
time.
great gift. How'd you find out about it?
I was invited to go actually a couple of times before I was willing to go and try it. I really felt like we're way too messed up to go to a group like this. And gosh, when we did it, I thought the videos that we watched, I thought, how did they get cameras in our house? Because it just was so much of what we were
that is a true
going
gift.
through we could relate to.
The first break we had, I hunted down the hostess, and I'm like, listen, where'd you put the cameras? Because you've talked about every single one of my kids in our home.
How were your two children that were already in the home when all this change started to occur? And they were young. I mean, remind me of their ages when your first son came to live with you.
They were, I don't know.
Did you say 3 and 6? Are they 3 years apart?
They are 2.5 years apart.
Yeah. So I knew they were young. One was still a toddler, I believe. But that's a big change for anybody. It was a change for you guys. It's a change for the family, and then a change for each of them independently.
Yes.
Did you feel prepared for parenting them through the change?
Not at the time.
No.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that oftentimes gets overlooked, is how foster care and adoption and kinship care can affect the biological children that are already in the family.
Yeah, everyone in the household.
Yes.
Yeah.
Our daughter went from being the youngest to the middle child. And so that was a big change. And then both of our kids had to go from, being a small family of 4 to a much larger family and having to share their mom and their poppy. Lots of changes.
Yeah, there are. I mean, and really, I think of my own, I'm just literally thinking of my own family right now, like sitting in our living room, and I'm like, I would be completely unprepared to prepare my family for an incoming child, no matter how they came to be. I mean, what an overwhelming responsibility, right? And I think it's definitely shows the heart of God to say, I called you to this. I'm going to get you through this. I'm going to give you the people that you need with the gifts that they have that I've given them that will help you in every area of this. But man, that's a lot of trust, and it is a lot of faith. So you now have your two sons. We are circling back now. I know a lot of time has passed and a lot of things have gone on in between. But those two half siblings have now re-entered the picture, and there's an opportunity now later for them to come be a part of your family. Was that something you had ever envisioned when they stayed that weekend at your home and you realized you couldn't take in all three of them at that time?
Well, I think we've always had a heart for them. And back when they did come for that weekend, it's not that we didn't want that to happen.
Sure.
It would just be a major change. A lot of things would have had to change about our family, our jobs.
Yeah. The very real things that, sustain a household, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, those two have always had a very special place in our heart. And during that time in between, we thought of them frequently and would sometimes see them and be excited to be able to see them and just know that, okay, they're doing all right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I may have gotten a little bit of the timeline off, but you have your two boys. Their half siblings became a part of your family before your next daughter, or she was in the middle of that?
And that's a story I've explained to her before is, if we had said yes that weekend to taking in 4 and totally changing the trajectory of our family, of our finances, of our, our careers, I told her, I'm like, you probably wouldn't have been part of our family.
Yeah.
Because we couldn't
you wouldn't have had
done
the eyes to see the need.
Right. So
because that came about like in a very public, the story you were sharing is like you looked at her and you just felt this, I need to give this child a home. Yeah. You maybe would not have had that same vision if you had, if you had just taken in 3 more children that you didn't know you were going to take in.
For sure.
Yeah.
Right.
So now you have the half siblings come back into the picture who you'd always had the heart for. And now it's becoming known to you that you're going to bring them in. No.
Or it was the 2 before.
Yeah.
Then
your daughter.
Then the daughter.
Yeah.
Then the other 2, they called us for kinship care. Okay.
Yeah.
I think I'm following now.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a lot. I can't keep track. I only have 3 and I can't treat. Yeah.
Okay.
So you have, you get this opportunity to take them in for kinship care.
Yes.
Right. Did you at that time feel any sort of like prickling from God that this is going to be more than just kinship care? These are going to be your children.
I did not. Truly, when we brought them home, we were just happy to be able to bring them together and to bring them closer to their 2 little brothers.
Yeah.
And wholeheartedly, we wanted them to be reunified with their biological family. We really supported that process, and we're rooting for that to happen.
Yeah.
And as time went on, it became more clear that reunification was likely not going to happen. And at that point, yes, by all means, we weren't going to let them go a second time.
So I want to ask a very real question, and I'll be interested to see if you guys have the same answer or if it differs. Not that it matters. It's just my own curiosity. At this stage, is there a time you look at one another and go, okay, I think we're done? Yeah. And you both felt complete and like you both knew at the same time, or did one take more convincing than another?
No, I think we believe we're done. But we thought that
after 1.
5 children ago.
Yeah.
4 children ago.
Yeah.
And, if I'm not going to shut that door because we know God, if God's going to tell us to go, we're going to go.
So what has this experience, the years of this, what has it taught you about the power of saying yes to God?
I guess just that he truly blesses obedience. He's never left us. He's never forsaken us. He's been by us the whole time. And, you touched on the James 1:27 verse where it talks about taking care of the widows and the orphans. And I look more at that verse as that's how God brings us into his family when we become Christians and we become saved.
Yeah.
because it's not always at our most distressed time.
True. It's true.
But when these kiddos, when you take them into your home, they're at their most distressed.
I don't want to interrupt you, but you just reminded me of a visual, a very powerful visual when you were talking in one of your circumstances with one of your sons, how he came with just the clothes that he was wearing and like a small bag. And the next day when they came to do the home visit, he was there with his bag and his shoes on because he just figured he was leaving again. And I thought about how in order for them to feel safe, or at least in his case, it was almost like he had to write the ending to his story, right? He's like, I'm leaving again. And how often we do that as followers of Christ, where it's just easier sometimes for us to jump ahead to write the ending to a story because it's too painful or it's too scary to think, well, I'll just let God be the one to write it. It's almost like we kind of close the door ourselves. But I've thought a lot about him standing there with his little bag and just, I mean, it's a heartbreaking thing to think about, right? I'm sure you've experienced loads of heartbreak. And I mean, that's just like one area of scripture, but even if the scripture is not specifically speaking to adoption, what are some of the scriptures that God kind of used to give you that like fuel during that time of your life, during that season?
So a couple come to mind. First is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, which is to trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. Because so many times we have said, God, we do not understand why this is happening.
Yeah.
And, as we continue to lean on him, he just keeps directing our paths. And then another thing that just comes to mind is so many times we have felt like we don't know what to do. And in 2 Chronicles 20, at the end of verse 12, it says, we don't know what to do, but our eyes are on you. And so when we start to shift our focus and start to ask the questions, what do? We don't know what to do. And we kind of panic and try to write the end of the story ourselves. That verse just really helps me remember that we need to focus back on Jesus and fix our eyes on him, and he'll direct us.
How have Misty and AJ been changed by just like the beauty of adoption? When you look at yourselves and your marriage pre-foster and adoption compared to what it is now, how have you been changed by this?
Go.
I mean, I think that we've grown closer together. Our relationship has become stronger as we lean in on the Lord and then with one another. Just learning to trust the Lord, become obedient, and do the work that he's called us to do. It has really strengthened our relationship together.
Yeah, and I'd agree. I mean, there's things that we've went through with our kiddos that I don't know the percentage, but I don't think most marriages would have made it through. But I do believe our marriage is strong and God's in it, and if God's not in the calling and you don't know your why, then it's probably not going to last.
Yeah. Becomes impossible to carry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's another thing we talked about and we wanted to touch on, that if you're getting into foster or adoptive care, know the why behind it, because if it's just to make you feel good or financially, it can be tough. It can be really rough.
Yeah, I imagine it could be a very, very aggressive rude awakening.
Yes. But we're firm believers, if God has his hand in it, it's going to be okay. Not going to be easy, but it's going to be okay.
Yeah, that he still holds you while you're walking through that. So what would you, I mean, I'm sure you just want to, part of you would want to just sit with a couple that was thinking about doing this and like pour every bit of information you've learned into them. But, if somebody, let's say, is already getting all the training they need, they're going through their home visits, they know they're just like a couple of weeks away maybe from having that like final piece where they could receive that call. What source of encouragement would you provide to them in this kind of short waiting period to know that at any moment their phone could ring, but right now they're just kind of waiting on the Lord?
I would say just keep covering all of this in prayer and remember that his timing's perfect. Sometimes while you're waiting for that first call, especially, it can become a bit discouraging.
Yeah.
And, just keep leaning in on the Lord. Remember why you decided you want to do this and keep praying And certainly if you do know somebody that has fostered or adopted, lean in on those resources and that support system.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I would say, if this is your mission in your mission field, you don't have to go abroad.
That's right.
For missions, because foster and adopt it's a mission field.
That's right.
And if this truly is your mission, you feel God's calling you to that, get ready to watch God work, because you're going to see some amazing things.
Kind of like get your rest now while you can.
Yes.
Yes.
It's interesting. We've been talking a lot about missions, and in some other conversations that will kind of come out in the coming weeks. And one of the things that I really felt like the Lord spoke to me one night on the way home is we had that very same conversation to say, you don't have to travel abroad to be a missionary. You're a missionary wherever God has planted you. And a lot of times that's in the four walls of your home. But that we have to be reminded that his people are the mission. They're the mission, and there's people everywhere. And if you ask God, what would you have me do here? He'll tell you. And I think oftentimes, almost every time, it's so much bigger than what our minds can conceive. It's like, okay, God, what would you have me do? And we fill it in with all these, well, he could have me do this, and I kind of have a gift in that. And he's just there like, oh, kid, you have no idea what I'm about to pour into your life. But your story has reminded me that we have to hold our children with open hands, right? Like that's the safest and best thing for them. That when we try to take complete control of anyone God has put into our lives, like I remind myself, my kids are on loan to me, and it's my duty as their parent to be ready to hand them over to the Lord. And when you do that, the peace that he pours into your life. And it seems scary to say, I give you complete control of my children, but really he has it anyway. We're just causing ourselves this undue stress when we think that we can hold on to them and kind of create their path for them without allowing him to do so. So some real kind of ways that people can help to support foster and adopt if they don't feel they've been called to that. We talked about supporting a family who's doing that. What are some other ways that we can support? Because we have quite a few families in our church who have adopted children. I know there has to be families in this church that are considering or who have considered foster. So if they feel they've maybe not gotten that complete call, how can they help in other ways?
The first thing that I would say is if you know an at-risk family, get on the front end of it and try to wrap your love and support around the families that are at risk.
Before the system ever gets it. That's great advice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, just to kind of get more into the trenches, there's so many things that you can do to support families that are fostering and adopting. It's taking a meal to them, offering to take a kid to practice or to an appointment, sending a card, just showing up and just being with somebody. I recently had some friends come over and just sit in my house with me, and just being there means so much.
Yeah,
so
that's good to know.
And contact Job and Family Services. Ask them, what are your needs right now?
Okay, that's great. And we'll link resources in the show notes, so you guys will have that. You had just reminded me of something, and of course I'll forget what it is now, but just the power of being present for your friend. I remember what it is. That was quick. Wow, normally it doesn't happen that fast. You had mentioned to me in our conversation, consistency is so often what these children do not have. So I would caution anyone who wants to come and start being a presence in your life to know, like, I'm going to see this through. I'm not going to just come in and out to offer help and then them not see me for a few months, because that can really rock the boat of a child that's been placed into a new home, because all they've really known is change. And it's nice to be able to give them stability. So I mean, just as a mother and an individual, and as someone who has heard your story, I wouldn't have thought of that before. I would have thought, sure, I can show up and offer to take that child to practice, not realizing that to that child, that could be a very scary thing. And that if I'm going to do that, I need to make sure that I'm able to do it continually, which is helpful. So any last thoughts?
Do I have any?
I don't think so.
You guys are easy.
Yeah.
I'm thankful. I really am. I'm thankful that you guys have agreed to share. And as I mentioned, we have a lot of families in our church who have gone through adoption. We have a lot of people who were adopted. So I look at this through the eyes of an adoptee. And of course, I was adopted at a time where things were very, very different than they are now. I'm not even really sure that foster care I'm sure it looked wildly different 40 years ago than it does now. But even the process of adoption was very different then than it is now. I mean, open adoption was just not, even really a consideration. My brother and I were both adopted from 2 different families in 2 different states, and it was closed automatically. I mean, you didn't give a chance to have the biological family coming in and out, which I know now is really the preference, is to keep the children around their biological family as much as possible. One final question, I did want to ask you this. You said if you know a family that's at risk, what would be some indicators of an at-risk family?
Inconsistencies. Somebody that you might see that's kind of dipping out of things, in and out of things.
Mm-hmm.
What else? Can you think of something?
I mean, I would say if you notice any red flags, substance abuse,
Domestic abuse, I'm
domestic
imagining.
abuse,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
One of our kids got involved in care because they weren't attending school on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
That was the red flag that to
Yeah.
somebody, whether, I don't know who reported that, whether it was a teacher or administration
Yeah.
who was like, hey, these kiddos haven't been coming.
Mm-hmm.
Look for things
Yeah,
like that.
I think we can all kind of keep that in our minds, so that if it comes up and we do need to just try to make sure that child is safe.
Mm-hmm.
So that's important. I appreciate you guys sharing that. We do think of the big ones, but oftentimes this child doesn't come with a sign that says, I don't have a good home life and I'm at risk. I mean, we have to kind of do a little bit of digging when something seems off, So I'm appreciative of you guys. I'm thankful for your hearts to do this. I know that your family and your children are blessed beyond measure to have you guys as parents. And I just look forward to hearing more about the story as time goes on and I get more of a chance to talk with you guys. So thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us, Noelle.
You're welcome.